Not only from me actually, but also from EF Eastbourne, where I am the Director of Studies. I have been here for about 2.5 years. Before that I was in a school in Liverpool, doing a lot of exam teaching there as well. I still do a little bit of teaching now from time to time, and have just recently finished a first certificate course. So everything I'm going to present to you today is personal. It's my beliefs, okay? And I know it does work with students, at least with mine. So I'm hoping you're going to find it useful. Before I was in Liverpool, I was in Warsaw in Poland. Is there anybody from Poland today? If there is, make yourself known. I was in Poland, in Warsaw, for nearly 20 years. I was running my own school for 6 of those. And I was also a methodologist in one of Warsaw's biggest schools. So I've got now nearly 24, 25 years of teaching practice behind me. Okay, so I am a little bit experienced. So let's get on then. So today what we're going to do, as you know, we're going to be looking at exam techniques. In particular, we're going to be looking at IELTS and the Cambridge exams, specifically Cambridge Advanced. But you don't have to be teaching those, hopefully, to find what we're going to be looking at today useful. It is very practical, okay? I understand that you're all teachers, and I've made it in such a way that I hope that whatever I show you, you will find, of course, useful, but also applicable, and you'll be able to use it in your lessons, for example, tomorrow morning, okay? It is a little bit different, it is a little bit new, and so we're going to do a lot of recapping and summarizing and going back just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, okay? We are going to be looking at the receptive skills today. So we're going to be looking at a reading exercise and a listening one. We are not, because of time really, but we're not going to be looking at the productive skills, okay? So nothing on speaking or writing this time, but hopefully in the future, okay? Right, I'm going to begin with a question for you lot, okay? So use the text box to respond. So thinking about your students, and hopefully some of you, if not many of you, are or have been teaching exam courses. Do you think that students see exam and general English classes as distinct from each other, or do you think they perceive them the same? Okay, so I'll just give you a minute or two. Can you put your thoughts in the text box? So lots of people are saying it's distinct, it's different. A couple of people are saying it's the same, which is interesting. Certainly the majority thinks it's that they are distinct from each other. Okay. Well, that's interesting. So what I did is I spoke to the first certificate group I was telling you about at the beginning. I spoke to them and I organized a little bit of a focus group, and I asked them the same question as I'm asking you now, okay? And this is what they came up with. So their responses were that for them, an exam course has a specific goal. Unlike a general English course. Obviously, the goal for exam students is the exam itself. And although there are tests in general English as well, obviously a concrete specific goal helps students to focus on where they're going. We also said that exam course gives them a reason to go to class, which is interesting because you would think there would also be reasons to go to a general English course as well, but it seems to be those reasons are clearer if you're an exam student. They also said things like, it helps me focus on the learning, which again is quite interesting, because you would hope that there was learning going on in the general English lessons as well. They also said, and this is a plus, although it might not look like it, they said it was predictable. So it was important for some of the students, at least, to know what they're going to do every lesson. So coming to school, they knew what kind of exercises they would have. There was also a greater focus on skills practice, and in particular writing and reading, which perhaps reflects a little bit that not a lot of writing goes on in general English, and very often reading is a vehicle for something else, like a task or a piece of writing to do towards the end of the lesson. More rigorous learning, in particular grammar, which is also an interesting point, because I'm going to come back to that point a little bit later, and they can see and they can measure their language progress much clearer in exam courses than they can in general English. And finally, they have opportunities to test listening skills, which again is probably a little bit like reading, in that listening in a general English is more like a vehicle for something else, whereas in exams, because you have a listening paper, a specific listening paper, you are focusing 100% on listening. Okay. If you have any questions while we're going through this, I'm going to put aside about 10 minutes at the end of the session for you to ask any questions you like. So if any questions come to mind during the session, please try to remember them and then keep them, and you can ask me them at the end, okay, if that's fine with you. Right then, let's move on to the next one. So, as I said at the beginning, we are going to look at an exercise from the reading paper and then later from the listening paper. So let's start with the reading paper. And I always tell my students, in the reading, the first thing you do is you don't read. So my question to you then, guys, is why don't you read if it's a reading paper? Oh, so immediately somebody says it's a waste of time. Okay. Time factor comes up. To evoke interest. And focus on tasks. So that's a good point. Skimming we'll be talking about as well. Okay. Yep, skimming and scanning. Okay, reading for gist. These are good points. I'll be addressing all of these a little bit later. And practicing grammar as well. So that will also come up. But yeah, I think that most people realize that you don't read because fundamentally you don't have time. Okay, so this is about the IELTS. That's the exercise I'm going to show you connected to the reading paper. So in the IELTS, for the reading paper, you have 60 minutes in order to answer 40 questions. So that means 90 seconds a question. And it's always good actually to show the students this kind of information, because they're very surprised that you only have 90 seconds, a minute and a half, to do each question. Okay? Other points, you don't need to understand the text. We'll be talking about this a little bit later as well. So what do you need to understand if you don't need to understand the text? And unknown words will create a kind of panic and even breakdown in the student during the exam if they focus too much on trying to deal with unknown words. Okay, and we don't want students becoming discouraged and giving up in the middle of the exam. So the techniques I'm going to show you today hopefully will address those issues in particular from the student's point of view, but also I'm going to be looking at your role in the classroom as well and what you will be doing with these techniques in the reading paper. Okay. So, where to start? Do you start with the questions or do you start with the text? So again, I'll just give you 30 seconds. What do you think? Oh my goodness, I think everyone agrees that you start with the questions. Okay, I think that's unanimous. Cool. Well, you're right, of course, you do start with the questions, but if you don't start with the text, how do you incorporate the text? Which role does it play? So the first thing I'm going to show you is what I call EIW, and that stands for easily identifiable words. Okay. Now the question is, what do I mean by easily identifiable words? So I'm going to show you something very quickly. Okay. I'd like you to have a quick look because that's all you're going to have. And then can you write in the text box, what do you see? Okay. So what do you see? Any kind of words or anything that you see. They are traffic signs, that's true, but what do you see on the traffic signs? Yep, people have said M1, North, a number, yep. Sheffield, yeah, okay, Good numbers, okay, cool, Let's go back and have a quick look. Yeah, Sheffield, the North, M1, these kinds of things. So I show my students this. I'm showing it to you as well for the same reasons. Because if you're driving on the motorway, you don't have time to read. And like students in an exam, you don't have time to read. So don't read. The problem is you need to read the text in some way or use the text in some way. And words like M1, North, Sheffield, for example, even numbers like 32 perhaps, or the A38, these are what I call easily identifiable words. So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail, okay? So easily identifiable words can be names. So you mentioned Sheffield and the North. Places, people's names, company names, etc. Numbers, you mentioned M1. Percentages, quantities, references. Could be titles, books, films, etc. And also italicized words as well. Words in italics like quotations, names, reference words, etc. All of these things have something in common, and that is you can see them more clearly in a text than the majority of words. Okay, just like on the road signs. So if it's a number, it's clearer, and if it's a word, then these words normally have capital letters. And yes, exactly, they stand out. Yeah, that's what these easily identifiable words look like. Okay, so another question is, what do we do with these EIWs? This is a page from an IELTS course book, okay, but it mimics an exam paper. And I've highlighted in the text some of the EIWs, the easily identifiable words, words like European Union, 75%, CO2, 30%, and so on, okay? So I've shown you the text with the EIWs highlighted. Now, you've told me already, and I've agreed with you, that you don't start with the text. You start with the questions. So let's have a look at the questions. I'm going to show you two parts, okay, because that's how it's arranged in the course book. So if we look at the first 9 questions, you can see that in terms of EIWs, I've only found one. So in question 5, the word cute. Now it's also worth remembering with your students that when you give them a text to have a look at and you say to them, start with the questions, don't start with the text, it's also worth reminding them that they should at least have a look at the title. Because now we can see that the word cute is in the title. It's about public transport and cute buses. So very often if the text, if the keywords are included in the text, it's normally because the text is about this. And if it is, in this case it is, then the keyword cute is not really going to help. Yeah? So we need to go on and have a look at the second part of the questions. Okay? Now here, these are questions 10 to 14. Okay? And here I've highlighted the easily identifiable words connected to the questions. So for example, words like Hamburg, Amsterdam, London, etc., etc. So here you can clearly see the role, and they're very good examples of easily identifiable words. Okay? So having highlighted these in the question, so this is step one, okay? Now we go back to the text to try and find where they are in the text in order to enter the text in those areas. So here is the text again. I've taken out all the words I highlighted before, and as you can see, the word Amsterdam and Hamburg comes up. So this is connected to question 10. So the second step would be that the students highlight the easily identifiable words in the text, because that's where they're going to start looking at the text and using it. Okay. So what I normally do is I show the students to circle a little bit above and a little bit below where the EIW is in the text. Okay. So having done that, that circle, that red circle, represents where we're going to enter the text. Okay. So just to recap very quickly, just to make sure everyone is on board with us. Remember, don't read the text. The easily identifiable words help you enter the text, but they are not exactly going to help you find the answer. So the next stage is to find the answer. We know where we are in the text, but we don't know the question yet. So we go back to the question, for example, number 10, and we highlight the keywords. So guys, you can already see that there is a difference between an easily identifiable word and a keyword. They're not the same, and I think you need to clarify this point in the way that I'm trying to do with you now, okay? Easily identifiable words help the students enter the text for the first time. The keywords help the students find the answer in that red circle, if that's clear. Okay, so the keywords here in question 10 are the words use and energy, because the question is you use something in order to make this energy. Okay, try to remind your students not to identify more than 2 keywords. They do have a tendency to underline almost everything, and that rather defeats the object of the exercise. They should find only 2 keywords. Okay? 1 is even better, 2 is fine. Depends on the question. You may have to kind of extend it to 3, but try to keep it to 2. Okay, so we found our 2 keywords. Now we need to go back to the text in order to find the answer and answer the question. So back to that red circle around the easily identifiable words, the names, and you can see that the keywords are use energy here. So something within that red circle is connected to using energy. The question then is, and I'm going to save you reading it because it's probably not the easiest text to read in terms of legibility. but the answer is hydrogen. So the energy being used for the buses in Amsterdam and Hamburg is hydrogen, okay? And that's the answer. So hopefully, so far, so good. I'm sure that all of you are aware of the term keywords. So the first step is the easy identifiable words, highlighted here in yellow. The red circle is the area where they enter the text. The red words underlined are the keywords from the question, and the blue is the answer. Okay? So let's move on, and the next stage is to put in the margin the number of the question. In this particular case, it's 10. Now you may be wondering, why do you do this? Well, let me show you. Very often, not always, I admit, but very often, the questions, both in IELTS or Cambridge, are in chronological order, but not always, I know, but usually yes. So, in that case, if we know where the answer to number 10 is, then I think we can easily predict where the answers to number 9 and number 11 are, okay? In this particular case, obviously 9 is going to be probably within the same paragraph, obviously before, and number 11 is probably going to be on the second page, which we are not going to look at today, okay? This is particularly important because I don't know if you remember exactly, but when we looked at the questions for this particular text earlier in the session, numbers 1 to 9 didn't really have any easily identifiable words. So you can't use that as a technique, but you can help answer number 9 by connecting it to number 10 in terms of location, okay? In that particular case, you would then go to number 9 and highlight the keywords, just as we did before with use and energy, and then more or less predicting where we think the answer would be, another circle, and then matching the keywords within that area. So you're skimming, as you mentioned before yourselves at the beginning of the session. If you also remember, going back to the second part of the questions, questions 10 to 14, all of them had brilliant EIWs. So rather than do number 9, I would recommend them going on and finishing questions 11 to 14 and then working backwards. So just to recap, okay, you don't have to answer the questions in chronological order. It's logical, I think, for students to start with number 1 because that's what is logical. But what I would recommend is, bearing in mind at some point you have to answer all the questions, but you don't have to do them chronologically. You answer the easiest questions first, those questions with the EIWs, okay? And then working backwards or forwards, depending on where you've put the question numbers in the margin, you can then do the others using keywords, not the EIWs, yeah, because they're not available. So hopefully that's clear. So it's good to stress, do not answer the questions in chronological order. Get rid of the easy questions first and give yourselves more time to answer the more difficult questions, the ones without the EIWs, that will require a little bit more detective work, okay, looking in the text. So let's have a look at this slide. It looks a bit confusing. It's not. I've divided it into 2 parts. The blue line on the left divides the first and the second halves. The first part shows you, so orange question, purple text, shows you the movement the students will be doing during the exercise, jumping from question to text, okay? So they start, as we all agreed, with the question. In the question, so if you look at the second half of the slide, the EIW, highlighting that, okay? Then they go to the text and highlight the same EIW in the text, and then draw a circle, the red circle, remember, around it, a little bit above and a little bit below. Then back to the questions. So that step 3, the orange question, is back to the questions to identify the 2, remember, maximum 2 keywords. Step 4, the purple text, okay, back to the text to skim read, as you recommended, skim read for the keywords, to look for the answer. And then once you found the answer, obviously you answer the question, okay? Then, final step in a way, the final purple one, you go back to the text and write in the margin the question number. So if you remember, we did it with question 10, yeah? And that will help the student find the previous and subsequent questions. Those questions, as I mentioned, that don't have EIWs, or easily identifiable words, you don't answer them until later. You answer the questions first with the EIWs, okay? Again, putting the numbers in the margins, using the keywords, and answering the remaining questions, okay? So what I've tried to do here is I've tried to visualize, using color, an abstract concept. And it might be worth doing the same thing as you introduce these techniques with your students as well, because most people have a visual memory. They learn through visuals, and this might be a more approachable way to get them on board, if you see what I mean. Okay, right then, let's move on. Now, what does this mean? Well, this is still the reading paper, and I did mention earlier that the students need to do a little bit of detective work in order to find the answers to the questions. So, guys, can you imagine that the grey box with the picture of the murder victim in the middle is the text in the exam? Okay, so the entire grey box is the text. Now, as we know, students will, naturally enough, start reading the text where the grey arrow is in the top left-hand corner. But we also know, if we've been using the easy identifiable words technique, that the answer to a particular question we're looking at is where the blood of the victim is, okay, on the floor. So what we're trying to show the students is what a waste of time reading big areas of the text which don't actually include any answers whatsoever. And you've all agreed that time is an important factor. So hopefully, again, through visualization, they will see that there are big areas of the text that they can afford to ignore, if that's clear. So using easy identifiable words, they would enter the text where the yellow arrow is on the right, find the answer within the red circle I showed you in the text, which in this particular picture is the red blood, in order to find out who the murderer is. Okay, who murdered this victim? So they're less like students and more like detectives. Okay, so hopefully that's a nice analogy for students to approach an exam paper in a different way. Okay, right, okay, hopefully that's clear, so we'll move on. And we'll move on to the second part of our session, okay, which is looking at a listening paper. This particular example is taken from Cambridge Advanced, so CAE. We're only going to look at part 1, so what you see on the screen now is all we're going to have a look at, okay? But I think what I'm going to show you next is perfectly applicable to all the parts of the listening. Okay, so a little bit of procedural work, because as I said, I very much want this session to be practical. Okay, I want you to take away the techniques I'm showing you and apply them in your own teaching practice. So, remembering the question paper before, okay, so what do you do here with your group? What you can do is, this time focusing on the keywords, easily identifiable words don't really apply in this particular exercise, okay? But keywords are essential. So, to find out how students can identify the keywords, you can ask them, or you can elicit the keywords from them just looking at question 1 only. See what they come up with. So you're doing a little bit of test, teach, test in a way. So you're testing them to see, can they identify the keywords and how many do they select? So you can remind them afterwards that whenever possible, select no more than 2, as I mentioned, okay? You can also give them a model. So you can model a question 2, for example, and show what you would do if you were a student. And then either together or maybe in pairs to make it more communicative, you could look at the remaining questions and they go through them together, highlighting the key words. And no, this doesn't have to be only for advanced students. I'm showing you CA only as an example, but any kind of exam at any level, for example, from Key, first certificate, upwards, whatever, I think it's applicable to all of these. Remember, guys, the exercises themselves are all very similar to each other, irrespective of the level, okay? So they work on the key keywords. You check together, okay? Make sure everybody's on board. And then you ask the students to cover the question paper, put it away, whatever, hide it, but don't look at it. So you've got them to go through these questions, highlighting all the keywords, and then you tell them to ignore everything. Well, only to a certain extent. Okay, so this is what it would look like, hopefully, working together. And then that's what they're going to cover up. Yeah, understanding the questions first that's also debatable. It's the same thing with the text. And we'll talk about that at the end, actually, but it's a very good point. No, they don't need to understand the questions exactly, especially, remember, new or unknown words. Students cover up the question paper and you ask them to take a blank piece of paper and the teacher reads out, so it's like a mini dictation, to the students the selected keywords and they write them down on their blank paper. Okay? This should also include the question keywords. Okay? What I mean is, if we go back for a second, and if we look at number 1, so what do Gordon and Annabelle agree about? They should also be included. So what and agree are as important as the keywords in A, B, and C. Okay? So they're busy writing all of these keywords down, and only the keywords, because they are the only ones you're dictating. So now the question is, what does all of this look like from the student's perspective? Okay? Well, it kind of looks like this. So, in number 1, question 1, the keywords in the question would be, as I showed you, what and agree. And then 1A is lacks story. B is director ambitious. C is book and subtler. Okay? And so on and so on. Yeah? I mean, you get the idea. this is what they have in front of them, and this is what they have going into the listening. Okay, so hopefully this is clear, and you're all still with me at the moment. Now, probably you're asking yourselves, well, okay, but what are the benefits of all of this? Yeah, I think the main idea, the general main idea, is you're asking students to combine two skills at the same time. And they're both receptive skills, so it's reading and listening. And even for a native speaker in their own language, it's quite difficult to do that, to do two tasks at the same time. Listen and read. So I think what I'm trying to show you is to reduce it to one simple task. And as I showed you in the reading, you inform your students, don't read. Here, you're doing the same thing. You're asking your students, don't read. This time it's a listening paper, and you want them to listen without any distractions or disturbance. Okay? The source of the information, the primary source of the information, is through listening. And that's what you want them to focus on. Okay? Reading all the other words that they don't need, just like in the reading text, will only distract them. I think it will also sharpen their listening skills, which, as you probably know, need to be sharpened. Even if they're watching a film or watching a TV program, most of them watch it with subtitles. Now that is not listening, that's reading. So drawing their attention to all of this, I think, will also generate a very useful learning strategy, which can be applied in other areas as well. Also, you're helping them and checking that they understand how important selecting keywords are, because that's all you're giving them. And as I said earlier, it can be done for all sections of the listening paper, and indeed it can be done, to answer your question earlier, for all levels. Okay, remember, CAE, the one I'm showing you now, is purely for an example. Okay, right then, some conclusions. Okay. Now, I want to balance it a little bit, so I don't want you to go away feeling like, okay, well, he thinks all his techniques are brilliant and they work, and the approach is foolproof, because, as I said, after 23 years of teaching experience, a lot of it spent with exam courses, I know, and I've heard, and I've had to deal with student reactions. So, for example, some negative aspects would be that students see exam courses as dry experiences, and some of them are put off by the academic aspect of the learning. Okay. Now, exam courses can also be something that it's not exactly what students expect. Okay, they're used to a more general English approach, not specifically exam focus. In the longer term, it can be boring. Okay, so this is also an element of washback as well, which I haven't mentioned today. And in a way, that's an important area, but I think one outside of today's remit. But if, like us here in EF Eastbourne, we have a lot of students on exam courses only doing them for 2 or 3 months before they take the exam, then for shorter periods of time, it's very often not an issue. But I think for longer periods, focusing on exam techniques can become kind of boring and a bit mundane. Another point is it's controlled and led by the teacher a lot of the time. It's not student-centered. It's not always communicative. There is little specific focus on gaining proficiency in grammar or vocabulary, okay? We are preparing them for a specific goal, which is a plus for some, but things are sacrificed in order to achieve that goal. At the end of the day, the students want to pass the exam, okay? And we want them to pass for them. And as a teacher of exam courses, we will be judged on how many and what mark the students get in the final exam. And finally, and I want to talk about this with the next slide, is that general English lessons fill and exam classes reveal. Now, what I mean by that exactly, I will explain while talking about this slide, okay? So we've looked at some negative aspects, so let's try to balance it a bit and not depress you too much. So let's have a look at some positive aspects, okay, of what I've been showing you. So it allows less proficient students a chance to successfully pass by shifting the focus away from grammar and vocabulary and giving a more prominent role for exam techniques. Why? Because exam techniques can be more easily and quickly taught and learnt by the students than trying to expand vocabulary and grammar, in particular, over short periods of time. We are not going to turn, for example, a B2 student into a C1 in order to do advanced in a short period of time. But we can make them proficient in exam techniques in order for them to pass the exam. So what else is positive? Well, tests are, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, very important. And the techniques that we give them will teach students to develop learning strategies that will help them with exam conditions and reduce stress levels. Even if you are a proficient student, if you can't cope with stress, it's not going to help you. But exam techniques will. Now, I mentioned that general English courses fill and exam courses reveal. So what I mean by that is that students are provided on exam courses with an insight into what they don't know, the holes in their grammar or vocab knowledge. So that's the revealing aspect of doing an exam course and using exam techniques. General English lessons tend to give, by their nature, new material, new target language. So they are filling up the students' language acquisition. And exam courses tend to reveal what they don't know and what they need to work on. Both aspects are crucial, okay? And finally, the exams, of course, have a high face validity. It means they look real, they look trustworthy, and therefore they are respected by students, educational organizations. Remember, IELTS is for going to university in an English-speaking country. The Cambridge exams are very important for employers in job interviews. They secure a level which is recognized. So as you can see, guys, there are pluses and minuses to all of this. So because time's moving, etc., let's kind of move on and sum up a little bit what we've been talking about. So I'm afraid, especially from teaching an exam technique point of view to your students, the emphasis is on you in terms of your teaching practice that will turn exam classes into either a positive or a negative experience for the students. Okay, and that brings me to the end of my session. Okay, hopefully it was clear and it was useful, and You were also asking about your certificate. So if you click on this link here on this slide and answer the following question, what does EIW stand for? And you answer the multiple choice, okay? Please don't answer it in the text box now, okay? This is for you to answer only using the link, and then that will generate a certificate for you, okay? So hopefully I've given you something to think about. You might not necessarily agree with everything I've given, but that wasn't the aim of the session. The aim was to raise your awareness of different techniques that you can use, and I hope that you'll go away, apply them, but also change them, make them yours, and let them fit your context, your teaching style, etc., etc., okay? So I believe we have about 10 minutes. If you have any questions, then please can you fire away in the text box for me, and I'll do my best to answer. So like I said, this is your question and answer session. So yes, 45 minutes is too short, I'm sorry. We could have gone on and done some more. As I said, speaking and writing, I also have techniques for this, but I'm afraid that will have to be for another session. Did I write a book about this? Oh my goodness. No, I haven't. I think it's a question of time as well, yeah? No, not yet. Will I be teaching other sessions? I'm certainly open to the suggestion. This has actually been my first webinar. My first webinar, today was my first webinar. I did one earlier, the same one. So I would certainly like to do another one, absolutely. How to find the right keywords? I can tell you that the questions written by the experts who prepare these exams and these exercises, they are written in a specific way. At the end of the day, the examiners don't want to trick the students, they want to help them. It's in their interest as well for the students to pass. They are written in a specific way where keywords are included in the questions, okay? Obviously it requires, as you well know yourself from teaching exam classes, it does require the teacher to do quite a lot of preparation before the lesson begins. So yes, you will have to go through the questions, and yourself, you will have to highlight the keywords that you hope your students will also identify. But I think a simple question to ask your students is, guys, what is the question asking? What's the fundamental point of this question? And then, if you ask this enough, and they have enough practice, believe me, they will be able to weed out the keywords accurately and quickly. Time management, as I said, probably is the biggest factor and the reason for these techniques. But you can introduce time management in maybe later, allowing them to listen to a listening from a past paper and give them the actual time they would be given in the exam, so they can start highlighting the keywords as soon as they turn the page. They don't need to listen to the instructions orally. If they've done enough practice already with you in the class, they will know exactly what to do with each stage. They don't need to listen to the instructions. They can use that time, in addition to the time they're given, to identify and select those keywords. Okay. Any more questions? Well, thank you very much for your compliments. I'm glad that you felt that it was worthwhile spending your time listening. Okay, and it would be very interesting actually to hear from some of you who tried this out and then changed things, improved them. These are just the basis. Obviously, they've evolved with me, but with so many brains here working, then I'm sure you can do a much better job than what you've seen today. It's just a basis, but hopefully a useful one. And I wish you all the best of luck, okay? And enjoy trying them out, and enjoy also seeing the transformation in your students as they pick up on some of these techniques, adapt them, adopt them, and use them in their own ways as well, okay? Yes, I think to the last question there, I think that the title, if I understand your question exactly, I think the title is important. Like I said, with do you remember one of the easy identifiable words with the IELTS reading paper I showed you at the beginning was cute, then that looks like a really good EIW, but it turns out, because it's in the title of the text, it's probably not going to help the students very much, because probably the whole text is about cute. Yeah. So yes, definitely draw their attention to the title of the text as well. That's probably the only thing in the reading text they are actually going to read. Yeah, and absolutely, we can activate schemata, we can activate previous knowledge, okay? But be careful, because again, this kind of strays into general English here. As you said yourselves right at the beginning, these are different lessons. They are distinct from general English. And you've got to, I think, teach your students not to worry about unknown words. They don't have access to a dictionary. They don't have access to a mobile phone in the exam. They've got to develop coping strategies to deal with unknown words. So they are not thrown, they don't panic. That's the last thing you want them to do. I think teaching the vocabulary, things like activating schemata, that's fine, but I think that comes later. You're focusing on exam techniques, remember? The vocab and the grammar, that is part of your teaching as well, but I think that's secondary. And that is, for a teacher, quite a difficult habit to break. We want to help our students, but sometimes you need to be cruel to be kind. Yeah? You need to leave them alone, let them work things out, and not always expect that the teacher is going to be there for them and give them the answers, because in the exam, the teacher is not going to be there. Okay, so you're also teaching them a little bit of independence, which I think doesn't hurt. Okay, cool. Just to finish things then, because I think that that seems to be it. You will get your certificates once you've watched all 6 webinars. Okay, so if any of you have seen any of the previous ones so far, then you'll know that at the end of each webinar there is a question to answer, and you need to answer this. And then when you've answered all 6 questions, it will generate a certificate for you. Okay? Cool. Okay. Well, if that's it, then once again, thank you very much, guys. Okay, thank you for listening. Thank you for all your comments. And I wish you all the very best of luck. Okay? So thank you. And goodbye.